It's time now for our news review segment where we look deeper into one of our stories. EU member states have failed to agree on an embargo on Russia's oil imports over its war in Ukraine. Senior EU diplomats were deadlocked weeks after the European Commission President proposed a complete ban on Russian oil imports by the end of the year. Sources say diplomats will still try to discuss a compromise plan ahead of the bloc summit on an exemption for pipeline deliveries to landlocked European countries. Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic say an oil embargo would be a severe blow to their economies. Meanwhile, a senior EU diplomat said there was still too much detail to sort out before EU leaders summit in Brussels on Monday. In the meantime, the German economy minister expressed fears that the EU's unity was, quote, starting to crumble ahead of the summit. Joining us is Mike Harris, the editor at Veterans Today from Phoenix, and also Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist from Bristol in the UK. Gentlemen, welcome. Mike, if I start with you. So we have several EU nations saying a Russian oil ban will essentially crush their economies. Experts have come out and said the same for all EU countries. Is Europe punishing itself here?
Well, what you're seeing here really is you have governments who are loyal to the globalist interest that want to see Russia destroyed, and you have other governments within the EU who are loyal to their populations and to the people who put them in office. So what you're seeing is a power struggle within the EU of the globalist interest versus the populist interest, and the governments who want to do the best for their own people, for their own populations. They want to preserve their economy. They want to make sure that people have heating oil in the wintertime, that they have fuel in the summertime, that they don't do without, that they don't damage their own livelihoods, that their own lifestyle doesn't suffer because of the globalists trying to take down and punish Russia. So that's really as simple as I can make it right there, as to what's really going on with this disagreement about the oil. It's really backfired and it has hurt the West. It's raising fuel prices, no grain exports, no fertilizer exports. All of these things have been disastrous to the Western economies. Even here in the U.S., we feel it. We're paying outrageously high prices for gasoline and diesel fuel and all these products, and food is starting to get scarce. And so you're finding out which governments are doing the job that they're put in office to do to protect their people, and which governments are truly aligned with the globalists and the elites who wish to destroy and have become toxic to their own populations.
Right. Okay, Tony, welcome. Tony, you heard Mike's comments there. We don't know what's supposed to come out of this EU summit on Monday, but if an all-out ban is imposed on Russian energy, it's the consumer that's going to pay the price, isn't it? Not European governments. And does that factor play a role in the thought process of EU leaders?
Well, no, I don't think that what the people want really plays very much part at all. What we've seen, though, of course, is the three main countries, Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic, all saying that they're simply not going to go along with an embargo on Russian oil. That they're far too dependent on Russian oil. And also, if there was to be an escalation of the conflict in Ukraine, then that would be very close to their borders. They don't want to have a war, particularly one which is being instigated by, particularly by the United States, who was behind the 2014 coup in Kiev, which precipitated this war, which then led to the sanctions. But I think in Europe, we've really got to start thinking about separating NATO out from the European Union. Having them both in Brussels is a bad idea. Maybe one of them should go down to Sicily so that they're not in the same area. because the European Union's tactics in this, trying to impose this embargo on all these countries, creating this kind of illusion of a fantasy of a consensus which never existed at all, with Ursula von der Leyen, who was never elected, the so-called president of Europe, imposing this as a top-down policy on the whole continent of the hundreds of millions of people in Europe is actually a farce, and it's not democratic. It is simply a way of controlling policy for all of these countries, and I'm very glad that the British are not actually part of this, although of course our policy in Britain on Ukraine is not good, that we're not part of this farce that's going on right now in the EU, because we cannot have a political union which is simply following the policies actually of NATO in Brussels, just down the road from the European Parliament. So I think also we've got to look at the background to all of this just very briefly. What's going on here is a direct result of Ukraine. It was a provocation by the West, I believe, and the Russians have the documents saying that the Ukrainian army planned to invade the breakaway Donbass region on the 8th of March. And so they preempted that by saying, no, you're not going to do it. These have been provocations by the West, and what we're seeing is an attempt, a rather shoddy attempt, which is really only made so that it works by the mass media here in the West, which is so much behind NATO and these other policies. So when it comes to getting a fuel embargo, I think it's a really good example of why actually the European Union is a kind of dictatorship, really. They're not these people are not putting together policies which are coming from the bottom up. It's all from the top down. And the person announcing the policy, Ursula von der Leyen, nobody ever elected her. She's been an appointee too. So
right, okay.
That's basically what's going on, I think.
Right. Tony, just bear with me. Mike, just bear with us for a moment while we take a look at some social media reactions to this story. Our first comment is from Peter, who says, the US puppet project EU can't fall apart soon enough. It's already caused the great suffering to ordinary people. WTI Trading Group has posted, whether or not the oil market will like such a watered down embargo remains to be seen. Pundits will have to lower their voices of supply fears as Russia can find buyers in Asia to compensate for the market share lost in the EU. Macro says the EU knows very well they can't enforce an embargo as Russia will divert oil to other nations. Such oil embargo politics will only boost the oil price. Steve says brainless leaders of the EU with their senseless sanctions against Russia have successfully started the process of Europe's destruction. Many of the sanctions against Russia, especially the oil and gas embargo, truly hurts Europe, but not Russia. How long will Europeans tolerate this? Mike, if I can get back to you, you got this post here saying that the US puppet project, the EU, can't fall apart soon enough. I mean, Germany is expressing fears that the EU's unity is starting to crumble. Does this 27-nation bloc lack leadership?
Well, what it lacks is popular consensus. And as my good friend Tony pointed out, these people are appointees. They were never elected by anyone. And this is truly top-down fascism being imposed across the whole of Europe here via the EU, where we're seeing demonstrations occurring everywhere. And this has been going on for quite a while with the EU dictatorial attitude. And in my opinion, the EU can't come apart fast enough, because it's not a democratic structure. It's a dictatorial structure. and it needs to be dissolved because the Western civilization is based on individuals and individual rights and the right to elect our own governments. And this EU government has not been elected. They've been imposed. And this was a very clever move by the global fascist who did this. And the resistance that they're encountering is becoming obvious to all right now. And this oil embargo thing is a prime example of how this goes bad. As I said before, the governments that are supporting the needs of the people, the needs of their population, are standing up for their people and their needs. They're not sacrificing their industry. They're not risking their people being cold for lack of heating oil in the wintertime. And they're not dealing, they don't want to deal with the escalating fuel prices. And as one of the social media guests said, all it's going to do is result in higher prices because Russian oil is still going to make its way to Europe. They're going to go out in oil tankers. They're going to do the practice known as lightering, where they transfer the crude oil from one tanker to the next. And then they, under a different flag, a Liberian or Panamanian flag, then they'll sail into Europe, and the European people are going to buy the same product for a much higher price. And this is not how governments are supposed to function. Governments are supposed to benefit their people, not oppress them. This is right. Europe is turning into a third world government here. It's awful what's going on there. It needs to be ended.
Right, let me get Tony's final thoughts on this. Tony, there's another post that says Russia can find alternative buyers in Asia to compensate for the market share lost in the European Union. I mean, and that's been a subject, subject of debate for a while now. Is this EU measure even a punitive measure against Russia?
Well, no. And in fact, Ursula von der Leyen herself has been saying over the last few days that I mean, I will paraphrase her, to save Europe from Vladimir Putin, we must continue to buy Russian oil, which is an almost ridiculous, humorous thing for her to say, because she's understood that the world oil price will go up and that will benefit Putin. And therefore, but of course, what she's doing, she's just making excuses for the fact that her embargo is a complete failure. And the way I think that the EU is operating here is it's coming up with its own policy that a few powerful people have drawn up on the back of a packet of cigarettes, and then they're imposing that and announcing it through the media to the world. And then any governments that start to push back and resist and say, no, we're not doing that, the EU is trying to use these kind of mafia-like intimidation tactics through very hardball diplomacy to try and bully them into agreeing with the policy that they've come up with in the first place. So I think that's really what we're seeing here, is a kind of it's a kind of the reason why Britain actually left the European Union is because they're just trying to push people around, and everyone is starting to rumble their game. There's also this embarrassing issue of the Ukrainian Nazis. I noticed one of the British newspaper foreign editors was over in Ukraine over the last few days, has just returned, Steve Sweeney. And he's called the failure of the Western media to really acknowledge that these are genuine Nazis that are fighting with the Ukrainian army, as part of the army, as a masterclass in fascism denial. So the really people who are really culpable in the West are those who are turning a blind eye to this fascism and the top-down European Union attempts to impose these ridiculous policies and to do a sort of recursive version of what Hitler was trying to do, which is attack the Russians, and even Napoleon attacked the Russians, and this Russophobia. And I think we just need to get rid of it right now, because it could easily get out of hand in Ukraine if NATO starts to get its oar in there. So, I mean, I think that's really where we're coming from, is complete denial of the fascist aspects of the Western support for the Ukrainian cause, so-called cause, which has been to attack the breakaway republics for the last 8 years, killing 15,000 people in the southeast of Ukraine, a fact which is not acknowledged at all here in the Western press.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Let me thank our guests for their contribution. Mike Harris is the editor at Veterans Today, joining us from Phoenix, and Tony Gosling is a historian and investigative journalist, joining us from the British city of Bristol. That brings an end to another edition of the News Review.